Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sinister with myself, Rosie O'Donoghue. Today we will be talking about the case of Scott Amedure, or as commonly known in the media, the Jenny Jones Show murder. So I knew there were themes of homophobia throughout this, but I actually didn't realise how strong it was throughout this entire case and the trial that is to come until researching it myself. So this was a wild episode to actually research. I was shocked. So I just want to get straight into this case by introducing you to Scott Amedure. Scott was the youngest of 6 children to parents Frank Sr. and Patricia. At 17 years old, Scott left high school to join the Air Force, which he served in for 4 years, before returning to his home in Lake Orion, Michigan. Scott's brother, Frank Jr., later said that he even found out about Scott being gay during Scott's time serving, and that no one, not even their father, really had an issue about it. And Scott was able to comfortably live his life as an openly gay man. Scott ended up getting a job as a bartender at Club Flamingo, a gay club in Michigan, which I just think has the cutest name. I'm not sure if it's still around, but I think that's a cute name. And he lived in a mobile home in the Chateau Orion trailer park with his roommate, Gary Brady. Scott had been described by friends, families, and neighbours as a helpful, friendly guy, and was also described as an openly gay individual who had no bones about it, which I find such a cute, funny way to describe someone, particularly throughout the 90s, which is when this all takes place. Scott was good friends with a woman named Donna Riley. So one day in the spring of 1995, Scott went to Donna's apartment to visit her, and Donna's neighbour and friend, Jonathan Schmitz, was helping Donna fix her car at this time and looking at her car brakes. Scott was 32 and John was 24 at this time. Donna said that the two appeared to have a good enough relationship and John had no issues joking around and being friendly with Scott. It does sound like at this time John did not care that Scott was an openly gay man. And by all accounts, though, this was when Scott got a little crush on John. Scott told Donna that he found John attractive, and Donna told John, I believe in an attempt to set it up, but John just replied that he was flattered and it was left there. So one of Scott's neighbours said that Scott was a, quote, talk show junkie, and that he particularly loved the Jenny Jones Show. The Jenny Jones Show was an American daytime talk show hosted by a woman named Jenny Jones, obviously, that ran from the early 90s. Now, in the first seasons of the show, they did have low ratings, which appeared to encourage them to lean more towards the more shock value type of TV, think Jerry Springer style, and this was when the more exploitative content began. The show became quite confrontational towards the guests, and as they wanted the drama, they wanted the shock value, and segments began occurring such as surprising a couple with a paternity test, or a segment called Bimbo School, where Jenny Jones would put on a big blonde wig and just catered to the dumb blonde stereotype. She would have spouses reveal affairs to their partners, and then she had revealing your secret crush. And all of these were filmed in front of a live studio audience. The show wanted the controversies and the attention to improve on those ratings. So, the segment on Secret Crush involved a person coming onto the show, describing their secret crush, when the crush began, and any fantasies involving the person, while said crush is backstage with noise-cancelling headphones on. Then the crush would come out and be asked how they feel and if they reciprocated those feelings, and that was the segment. One day, while Scott was watching the Jenny Jones Show, she advertised for same-sex secret crushes, and Scott decided to call up the number and sign up to tell John on the show that he had a secret crush on him. He then called up Donna, who was at work, to inform her that he'd called the number but wasn't thinking they'd call him back. However, Scott did get a call back and was requested to go on the Jenny Jones Show for their taping of the episode Revealing Secret Same-Sex Crushes. So this was in 1995, nearly 30 years ago, where homosexuality was practically demonized in a lot of the world still. Obviously it was getting better, but it still was not great, and people still weren't super accepting of same-sex relationships. So I do believe this was done more for the shock value, for the views. Maybe the secret crush views were going down. So Scott asked Donna to fly with him to Chicago to tape the show, and based on statements later made by Donna, it sounded like he was more wanting a fun time with his girlfriend in Chicago, where they'd also get to be on Scott's favourite show. So it seemed like he was just extremely excited for this to all occur. Plus, I think it's like 3 flights to Chicago, so how exciting. Around the same time, Jon received a call from the show asking him if he wanted to be on it and explained that someone had a secret crush on him, but they couldn't tell him who. They had also apparently stated it could be either a male or a female with the crush, but Jon said he was led by producers to believe it was a woman with a crush on him. Initially, Jon had thought Scott and Donna had something to do with it, but he had asked, and they both denied it, wanting to keep it as a surprise for the show. Jon said he participated in the show out of curiosity, but he had previously been in a long-term relationship with a woman, which ended about 6 months prior to this, and he'd told co-workers that if it was his previous girlfriend, he would marry her this time. So I think there was a decent part of him thinking it was her. So Jon went off and he bought a new sport jacket type suit with a new shirt and tie, and we think new shoes as well. It wasn't 100% confirmed, but a few people were pretty confident that he bought new shoes as well. So March 6th, 1995 rolls around. All three have travelled to Chicago to tape the show. Jon obviously travelled separately to Donna and Scott, and Jon was backstage with the noise-cancelling headphones on. Jenny Jones starts the show by asking the audience how they would reveal their secret crush on someone. Asking, A, would you write that person a letter? B, would you tell that person in private in case he rejects you? Or C, would you tell that person that you're gay and you hope he is too on national television? And the crowd absolutely roared for it. It was so clear that she had been getting views by sensationalizing the situation. She also made it clear that guests coming in were not being made aware of the secret admirer's sex. So they wanted that shock of the guests too, and maybe the embarrassment. I think at the time it was a dangerous thing to do. At this time, so many people would be reacting badly and possibly being homophobic. I just think that that is one thing that could have changed all of this if they just cleared up that it was a same-sex secret crush segment instead of wanting the shock from the guests when they find out. I think the shock of a man coming out and seeing another man on stage with a secret crush on him, obviously when done live you get more of an interesting reaction, but doing this just for the shock of it, I think is too dangerous in this time particularly. I think now it'd be different, but in 1995, 30 years ago, we've come such a long way. I think it's too dangerous at this time. So apparently, producers had offered Scott flowers to give and to Jon, and he declined. And they'd also wanted Scott to kiss Jon, and he wouldn't do that either, which if that's true, I'm 100% on board. Like, how dare you try and kiss someone on TV, possibly when they're not wanting it? Like, absolutely just not right. So Scott and Donna were sat on stage and Jenny Jones began asking Scott questions about Jon. She wanted to know about the first time they'd met, and Jon explained meeting while Jon was working on Donna's car. She further pushed on first impressions, and Scott explained that he was working under the car and that Scott could only see Jon from the waist down, which got a little flirtatious coo from the audience. So Scott was encouraged to divulge on details of different fantasies he was having about Jon, and began mentioning different things about, oil pouring on Jon while he was underneath the car and tying Jon up in a hammock, with these continuous prompts from Jenny encouraging it. So as the prompts continued, did seem to get further into sharing these thoughts on TV. Scott further said that he has a large hammock at his home and has fantasies entailing whipped cream and champagne, stuff like that. Scott's mum later said in an interview that Jenny Jones had apparently said to Scott, "Make it look good for the audience or I will be very mad." So I don't know if he's just trying to give her what she wants because he's excited to be on her show and doesn't want his part to be axed. And Jenny Jones confirms that Jon knows that Scott's gay, but asks if he knows if Jon's gay, and Scott replies, "Anything is possible." She then asks what it was about Jonathan that was so exciting for Scott, to which he replied that Jon has a cute little hard body, then said he's just a tiny little cute thing, he's gorgeous. He doesn't say anything there. It's not like this sexual deviancy type thing. It sounds like he just has a crush on a boy. He's talking highly of him. I think that's sweet. I also think that this was more of a sweet gesture from Scott. I don't feel like he or Donna had any intentions of embarrassing Jon or causing him any harm. It does just sound like a man that finds another man attractive and fancies him a bit. So this was when they brought out Jon to see who has the secret crush on him. Jon comes out, smile on his face, and he keeps it there. He maybe looks a little disappointed initially, possibly because it wasn't the ex-girlfriend, but he's being a good sport about it. He immediately hugs Donna and gives her a kiss on the cheek. He then moves towards Scott and goes for a handshake, but Scott does kind of pull Jon's hand closer, pulling him into like a friendly hug. Jon looks a little uncomfortable and his arms weren't hugging Scott back. He just kind of leaned into him on the side, like a little bit of an awkward half hug, if even that. Then they all sit down. Jenny Jones said, Did you think Donna had the crush on you? And Jon replied, Did I? No, we're good friends. And then she says, Well, guess what? It's Scott that has the crush on you. And Jon says with a smile, You lied to me, towards Scott and Donna. But he's still smiling and clapping and still appears to be taking it as a little joke. Jenny then plays a recap of Scott talking about the champagne and whipped cream fantasies, and Jonathan covers his face, but he's laughing while looking uncomfortable. Plus, he's only 24. Like, I feel like there's a lot for a 24-year-old to deal with. And I'm saying these things for anyone that knows what happens in the future. I'm not condoning anything that will happen in the future, but I think this is a really hectic situation for a 24-year-old to be kind of thrown at. Later commentators felt like Jenny Jones was exploiting the situation, with Jon smiling along, but there being clear indications that he doesn't want to be talking about this on national television, but trying to be friendly and play it off. This is absolutely, no excuse for anything further, but I don't think this part's okay either. Jenny then says to Jon, He's been fantasizing about you since he saw you under that car for the first time. He had an under-the-car fantasy, and he had a hammock fantasy he's been telling us about. She then asks, Did you have any idea that he liked you this much? And Jon replied, No, that I did not. And he tries to play it off that he finds it flattering. Jenny asks if Jon is involved with anyone, and he says, No, I'm not, but I am definitely a heterosexual, and just looks completely thrown off guard and is doing an awkward laugh. Someone very suddenly being asked all these sexual questions on TV and things like that. It's just, again, the shock value, the views, whatever. So Jenny asks Scott if he's disappointed. Scott says, No, not really, shrugging it off. Jon tries to speak too, and Scott further attempts to speak, but Jenny Jones just keeps talking over them, saying, It's a nice compliment. If nothing else, it's a nice compliment to pay somebody, refusing to let either of them speak. It appeared like it wasn't making for good TV in her eyes, so she just shut them both down from talking. Donna later states that after filming, Jenny Jones had asked Jon something to the effect of how this would affect his relationship with Scott moving forward, and Jon said that they could remain friends. After taping, everything seemed fine. Jon even tells Donna and Scott that he can drive them home from Detroit if they change their flights to his flight, which they did. I believe it was like a detective. I saw an interview with a detective, and he said that they'd partied on the plane. I'm actually not sure what that means. It's like, it must be a really short plane ride. So I'm not sure if he was just meant like they were drinking and like laughing or what. But I'm actually not sure what he means by that. But apparently they partied on the plane going back to Detroit. And then Jon drove from Detroit to the Chateau Orient trailer park where Scott lived. They went into Scott's home briefly, and then the three of them went to a bar called Brewski's and had some drinks. The three of them were apparently out quite late this night drinking. One of Scott's friends later testifies that Scott and Jon had a sexual encounter the night of the taping. However, Donna said that she was with both men the entire time and nothing sexual happened between the two of them. Then, sometime between the taping of the show on the 6th and the 9th of March, Jon ended up speaking to his dad, Alan, on the phone, who asked what happened with the show, wanting to know who the admirer was. Jon didn't answer and then began to cry. Jon then told his dad, It didn't work out well in Chicago for me. It was a guy. Alan admits that he then became angry, like on the phone to his son about this. Now, it becomes clear that Jon was raised in a homophobic household, to say the least. Jon further tells Alan that he had concerns about people thinking he was gay if they saw him on the show, particularly being concerned about his grandparents, who obviously had negative homophobic views. Alan appeared to have amped up Jon's anxiety with people viewing him as a homosexual during this phone call. This is further proven throughout the trial that will come later. The following 2 days, Jon worked long hours at his workplace, the Fox and the Hound restaurant, and his co-worker Michelle Wright testified that he seemed angry about what had happened on the show. On the 9th of March, Jon returned to his apartment after work and found an orange construction barrier with a blinking light and a note that read, "If you really want to get it off, I'm the only one that has the right tool," which had obviously been left by Scott. So this is where I get frustrated myself. In my head, Scott had Donna tell Jon that he finds him attractive. Jon dismissed it. Then on national TV, he said it again. Jon's done the whole, "I'm flattered, but I'm not interested in you, thank you" type thing, polite about it, didn't affect their relationship. And I'm not sure if they had a sexual encounter that night, but I feel like with everything given, Jon has tried to make it clear that they were just friends, and Scott's not really letting that happen. Just as a woman, I would be extremely frustrated over someone not respecting my wishes and continuing to push. Not condoning any future events in any capacity. I just do understand a certain level of frustration, especially with this being Jon's home. Like, things being left in your home is different level too. However, this was when Jon became angry, feeling like he wasn't being left alone, and according to police, this was when Jon made the decision to kill Scott Amedure. So when I say I would get angry by that, I mean more like I'd tell Scott we couldn't be friends anymore if he couldn't accept that we could only be friends. Definitely not result to murder. So Jon went to the bank, withdrawing money from his account, then to a hardware store to purchase bullets, and then went to a final destination to purchase a 12-gauge shotgun not far from Scott's home. He arrived at Scott's home where Gary, Scott's roommate, answered the door. Gary said that Scott walked out of the bathroom and greeted Jon, and they both walked down the hallway together while Gary sat at the front reading a newspaper. This was where Jon asked Scott if he'd left the note, and Scott only smiled in response. Jon left the home, telling Gary he'd left his car running and had to go shut it off. Moments later, Jon returned, knocking at the door. Scott answered it, and Jon was stood in the doorway, pointing the shotgun at Scott. Scott picked up a wicker chair from near the door in an attempt to defend himself and said, quote, "Gary, help, he's got a gun." Then Jon pulled the trigger. Scott was shot in the chest and fell to the kitchen floor, and that's when Jon shot him again. Jon left immediately and rang emergency services and confessed to killing him. On the call, he starts by calmly saying, "Ma'am, I think I just shot a man." Then he starts getting more worked up. It's like it's kicked in, and he starts crying and saying, "I just shot this guy." And when the lady asked why he did that, Scott just responded, quote, "Because he fucking put me on national TV. He played a very bad fucking thing on me. He took me on Jenny Jones. I just walked in and fucking killed him." Scott's roommate also called emergency services and said to them that Scott had been shot, and it was someone Scott knows, saying, "I only know his name is Jon," while he begged for emergency services to hurry. But Scott died on the 9th of March 1995 at 11:01 a.m. from the gunshot wound. When questioned by police, Jon initially stated, "I did this because he wouldn't leave me alone." So, opening statements began October 14th, 1996. Jon was initially looking at being charged with first-degree murder and possession of a firearm. Due to Jon admitting to the murder on the phone to emergency services directly following the murder, defense knew that he could not plead not guilty, but they wanted to lessen the charges in any way possible. Thus began this smorgasbord of defenses. Fred Gibson, Jon's defense attorney, literally said to them, which I find so gross, quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, there was no murder here. There was a shooting, but there was no murder. The evidence is going to show that Jonathan came into this world possessed of a disease, depression, developed alcoholism. Jon didn't have the ability. He didn't have the ability to think, reason, or plan." This all said in an attempt to avoid the premeditation and deliberation charges, to lesser it from, say, first degree to second degree. So Jon's defense then argued the gay panic defense for this case. So the gay panic defense is a legal defense that is used to essentially blame the victim by stating a violent crime only took place by a heterosexual person as they lost control and reacted badly due to an unwanted sexual advance made towards them by a homosexual or trans person. So basically, they were so scared or offended by the same-sex sexual advances that they were provoked into reacting aggressively or in self-defense. And they're classed as being temporarily insane during this time in order to receive a lesser sentence. So in Australia, this is known as the homosexual advance defense. I think this is absolutely fucking sickening. Like, absolutely sickening. You can claim anything after someone dies. They can't defend that they were never acting sexual towards you. And also, as a woman, there is no defense for this, for when men react badly to you or come up to you and we're scared that they're not taking no for an answer. We don't get to kill someone. We just have to cop it. And now it's like, oh, but a gay person came up to you. God, heaven forbid. There was a national discussion of violence towards gay people following the murder, and the use of gay panic defense in Jon's trial drew up sharp criticism from many gay rights advocates. Rightly fucking so. So this defense is now abolished in all states of Australia. I believe that it's still legal in other countries. Some states have banned it in America, but Michigan, where this crime took place, was the most recent state to ban this defense, which occurred just this year. So up until 2024, people were able to claim the gay panic defense. Wait, I don't know, that's just insane to me. So, Jon's defense also argued that he was a chronic drinker diagnosed with bipolar disorder and Graves' disease, and that the combination of the two caused him to commit the murder due to his mental illness and the humiliation of being put on the Jenny Jones show for others to speculate his sexuality. There was an argument that he killed Scott due to humiliation and thought he would be made a laughingstock on national television. The prosecutor thankfully argued embarrassment is not an excuse for murder, which is 100% correct. Now, Jon's psychiatrist and family testified with proof of Jon being in a bad place mentally, and prior to this having attempted suicide, with his dad, Alan, admitting to his son having consumed a whole bottle of his medicine previously in an attempt to take his own life. An endocrinologist even came in and testified about how bad Jon's condition with the Graves' disease was, and that he was extremely thyroid toxic. But then when questioned by prosecutors, said that you can have that condition and not kill somebody. So it did seem like an absolute overstretch, pulling out any specialist who has worked with Jon and hoping that something would make the jury feel sorry for him. So obviously the defense team itself was acting super fucking homophobic, and even in interviews and documentaries later, they're still acting extremely homophobic. Like, he could not have had a better defense really, because they all seem like absolute homophobes. So classing this as a reaction to a traumatic event and claiming he already had bipolar that was coupled with Graves' disease and making it a different reaction than the average person might have, but a valid reaction for his circumstances. It is not a valid reaction for anyone, actually. Like, do you know how many people embarrass the shit out of me? And I might think about it, I've never killed someone. I also know people with bipolar that get embarrassed and they haven't killed anyone. I have friends with Graves' disease that also get embarrassed. They too have never killed anyone. Like, I just think it's so crazy that this was allowed. So Alan testified about the phone call made after the taping and thoroughly showed the jury of his own homophobic nature. He appeared visibly angry on the stand when discussing anything homosexual related of the case, and he clearly did not want anyone thinking that Jon was gay and appeared to be saying anything to wipe that rumour. Alan made a tape summarising his opinions on the case, which were used in the trial. One statement was, quote, "Father's thoughts. The reason that he had to kill Scott Amedure was to prove he was not homosexual." On the stand, this was read, and he agreed with this, further saying, "Yes, well, how would you feel if your father thought that maybe you were homosexual?" Only reiterating those homophobic thoughts clearly viewed throughout the family, and justifying them. To justify them on the stand, mortifying to me. I could not. So in 1996, Jon was charged with second-degree murder and possession of a firearm instead of the initial first-degree murder charge, which would have gotten him life in prison without the possibility of parole. Instead, he was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. He served 2 of those years and later overturned on an appeal due to jury selection errors. During the second trial, the prosecutors had an absolute baddie on their side. The prosecutor's name was Donna Pendergast. I believe that's how you say her last name. And oh my gosh, I am obsessed with her. I just want to go over the closing statement because that's the most interesting. So in the closing statement, Donna said, quote, "There's so much you don't know about Scott Amedure. You don't know what his future hopes were, nor his past regrets. You don't know anything about him except that he was gay and how he died. But he was real, and he was alive, and he was only 32 years old when he was brutally murdered. And somewhere in a cold cemetery, his body lies in the ground for eternity because of the actions of that man, while pointing towards Jonathan Schmitz. She then asks the jury to not forget the last thing that Scott would have heard, pulling out a shotgun, racking it twice with a creepy, like, noise, echoing throughout the entire courtroom. And that was the end of the closing statement. Like, she sat down. Jon got the exact same sentence again, second-degree murder and possession of a firearm, which was the absolute maximum that he could have been charged with the second time around. And it was stated that Scott was murdered because he had the misfortune of angering the wrong man, Jonathan Schmitz. Yeah, just having such a baddie on your team, how amazing. She wasn't the one that said that about angering the wrong man, but I just think she was such a baddie. I would want her to be my prosecutor. Then Scott's family went on to sue the Jenny Jones show for negligence. I do just want to touch on this trial and not go too far into it. The trial was covered on Court TV, which is the TV channel that shows court cases, which is, funnily enough, produced by the exact same people that produced the Jenny Jones show. The Amedures argued that the men were used as a source of entertainment, not knowing what Jon's emotions would be to the event. Initially, the Amedure family were given $25 million after the trial, but in 1999, unfortunately, the verdict was overturned in the Court of Appeals, as it was found that the producers of the show can't be held responsible for what happens to the guests after they appear on the show. Ultimately, it was found that the producers could not reasonably anticipate a murder resulting from Scott and Jon appearing on the show, and despite the show's cruel sensationalism and surprise tactics, it had no duty to anticipate and prevent the act of murder. And the Amedure family never received any compensation for Scott's death. The Jenny Jones show ran until 2003, which was 7 years after the death of Scott Amedure, and it was sad, as in the documentary, Scott's brother Frank Jr. said, quote, "None of this would have happened if it wasn't for Jenny Jones exploiting homosexuality," which I think is so true. So the episode that Scott and Jon appeared in was shelved due to the murder before it ever came close to airing. However, the episode was broadcasted on October 17th, 1996, as part of Court TV's coverage of the trial against the Jenny Jones show. So also too, I think it's gross that the producers are being charged on trial, and their trial is being shown on a channel that they're making more money on. It's like a bit gross, but anyway. Jonathan Schmitz was released from jail on parole on the 22nd of August 2017 after serving 22 years, and he was 47 years old when he was released. Frank Jr. said in an interview that he was troubled by the parole decision, stating, quote, "I wanted assurance and that the decision was not based on just good behaviour in prison. I'd like to know that he learned something, that he's a changed man, is no longer homophobic, and has gotten psychological care." And that is the tragic story of Scott Amedure. I think it is actually just, I think it's so sad, like the homophobic views, like everything. I personally think, had the Jenny Jones show just said to Jon, "Hey, it's a man that's going to confess his love for you, his crush on you," I'd say he just would have, "Oh, look, I'm actually really not interested in being on that show." Nothing would have happened. So I think it was their duty of care to just disclose that much. Also too, I'd say, and this is merely speculation because I don't know these people, based on Jon's father's testimonies and everything, I would say had he not spoken to Jon on the phone, perhaps Jon's anxiety would not have been set off to want to go off and murder someone. He probably wouldn't have been pushed to this point over this now. It's just very sickening, but thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a lovely day and I will see you next time. Toodaloo.